Welcome, everybody. We are so excited to have you join us today. My name is George Rogers, and I'll be your host. With this lovely conversation, I'm really excited about. We want to thank Lighthouse Research Advisory, as well as Hi Bob, for hosting this platform. And I'm excited about all the things that you're going to be hearing today. So looking forward to that. This will be recorded. And so we are live now, but we will be recording this and it will be sent out to you. And you'll be able to have that on demand to be able to go back, just in case you miss a smart thing from the one and only Ben and Ken. So this is the Ben and Ken show, where you're going to get some insights, some good stories, some laughs. We're going to have a great time here. Also, please be sure to put any questions in the chat. But if you want us to look at these questions and maybe send them out to our speakers here, Ben and Ken, please put those in the Q&A box. We'll be able to get those, and we'll have people also answering those. We got a lovely team on the side that is working, pushing buttons and answering all those great responses in the chat with us today. And listen, I'm very excited, so I don't want to take too much more time because, like I said, we got a lot of stuff we want to cover. And so I want to real quickly encourage you. There's going to be a poll that's going to pop on your screen. If you haven't seen it yet, it's going to pop up. We got about 20 seconds or so. Just respond to that question. It gives us good feedback, and we're excited about hearing and seeing that poll. While the poll is going on, I want to introduce and let those lovely speakers here. Ken, if you will please first introduce yourself. And just to mix it up, Ken, for those who may have not ever seen you or heard you, give them one fun fact that is pretty cool about yourself.
Oh, okay. That's no, I have to think about that one. But hi everyone, I'm Ken Matos. I'm the director of market intelligence at HiBob. My background is as an organizational psychologist, and I've spent the last 15 years studying what makes work work for people and how to make your company more successful through the talent that you leverage. At HiBob, I focus on research around what's going on in the HR field, as well as how you can use data from things like your LMS, HCM, and other systems in order to be able to drive better and more effective strategy. Oh, and one cool thing, it's an interesting thing. I don't know if it's cool, but I am one of the few people in the world who seems to not like chocolate at all.
All right, we're going to have to kick Ken off the stage right now. I think that's going to happen right here at this. Okay, wow. I'll match that one in a minute, Ken. So, hey everybody, I'm Ben Eubanks. I am a Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research and Advisory. I spent my early career as an HR practitioner and professional, and wanted to be in HR when I was a kid. I wanted to have an impact on people. I wanted to help them find meaningful work. I wanted to do all those sorts of things. As we'll talk about in the story today and talk in the conversation, sometimes you find out that it's not enough to have the heart for that. Sometimes you find out that you could have some data to make that happen. And so I've written multiple books. I speak on different stages, and all with the hope and the direction of helping HR leaders be better at the work that they do, have a little bit more insight into what's happening in the world out there through the research we collect, and trying to make the world better one HR pro at a time. And the fun fact about me, Ken, I'll match off of yours, is I'm one of the few people that doesn't like coffee. So if we happen to meet somewhere out at an event, bring me a chocolate bar, bring Ken a cup of coffee maybe, and we'll all have a good time together and have a blast. Yes. George, don't forget to do your quick intro as well.
Yes, I'm George Rogers with Lighthouse Research and Advisory. I am the Chief Culture Officer, and I love, being in this environment to be able to cheer. I'm the inspirational guy that loves to cheer and just celebrate and help champion people. That's my heart. I encourage and like to love and champion people. I'm one of the few people in the HR space that likes to use the L word. So love just comes out. I just like to bring that inspiration and joy into the lives of HR people. We need it. We need more of that kindness and that effort. And so I bring a lot of authentic myself to the table, and it's fun. One fun fact about me is I love shoes. I went the other way. I was going to say something that I did not like, but I can't think of anything because I love chocolate, so I want to hang around Ken, and I love coffee. So if I just hang around both of you, I will be pleased. I will say I do not love snickerdoodle ice cream. I just found that out. I love the cookies. I do not like snickerdoodle ice cream, but I know somebody here that loves ice cream, so I'll share that with Ben. But listen, we introduced ourselves, and we could talk about all these great things, but I really want to dive into this conversation. And when I first heard the title Beyond Gut Feeling, It really intrigued me. And I'm really interested because all of us, we've been talking about this for weeks, months. And I want to just jump into just a quick question with you, Ben, being the data research. Every time I say data, you smile. When I say research, Ken smiles. So I want to get both of those out there to cover the love language of data research. But we've been talking about this for a while and doing a lot of research on HR and data. What are some key things that you're seeing as we're doing this research study? How does it balance being? What's intriguing for you? What makes you excited to be able to share with the audience?
So I think the thing I'll tell you is a quick story. So when I was early in my HR career, I realized we had a problem with turnover at our company. And we had 650 employees. We had turnover of about 55% a year. So it was like nonstop. And as the new person on the team, it was my job to process new hires and terminations. And sometimes it was the same person in the same day. That's how quickly we would turn people over. And so I thought, let's find a way to solve this. And so I gathered some data. I went to my boss. I showed her what we could see. And I said, hey, here's some ideas what we could do with it. She's like, stay in your lane, get back to work. And that response to me showed me that just having data doesn't necessarily make someone interested, doesn't get you the support and buy-in, doesn't get you the excitement that you might have for it from the people around you. And so when Ken and I started talking about doing this session a day and sharing this with all of you, I think both of us have a heart for taking this really what can be very complicated, right? Data can be a challenge. Collecting it, cleaning it, making sure it's presented in a way that makes sense. All those things are great skills to have, but some of the other things that we're seeing like attach around that, if those are missing, you're going to fall flat on your face. I mean, not through no fault of your own necessarily, not through a lack of effort, but through a lack of touching on some of these other things that matter. Like, do you have the attention and interest in people around you? Do you have the right tools in place to help you gather the data? Or are you trying to piece it together from multiple different systems, different tools, things like that? So that's part of what really drove me to want to talk about this, to bring this to you today. We're going to share some data points, some stories, some evidence with you that hopefully doesn't just make you say, oh, that's interesting, but at the end of this, it's our goal for you to walk out of here saying, I know what I need to go do to be better at this overall. Ken, what's your first thought on that?
So when I think about what's going on in data and how people are doing it in HR, I think one of the key things I've learned over my career is the importance of knowing what your leader cares about and then proactively building your research program around that. Because one of the things that happens so often, I've seen it over and over again in my career, is the question comes in from leadership about how do we do X, Y, or Z? And you know in your gut the way to do it, but then you realize you haven't collected any of the data that you need, but you only have like a week to give them an answer. So you stumble around, maybe you get something, and it's just not as convincing as it needs to be, or it's not really aligned, or even you're just like, this isn't really answering that question, because it often takes time to gather the information that you need. And so the HR people that I've seen be really effective with data are the ones who are thinking about that story they want to tell long before they get the question. Whether it's like, I know my boss cares about X. So how am I telling the story of how what we do influences X long before he or she shows up in my office to make that a question?
Yeah. So let's dive into some of the challenges that we're seeing, some of the gaps. What are some of the biggest gaps or challenges with the HR and data, Ken?
So we did some research asking HR leaders what data they track and what kind of problems they had with understanding their data. And so one thing that really popped is about half were doing work with turnover or engagement. Then it dropped to about a third or less doing anything else. So half of people weren't really doing much. And then most of everyone who was doing something was just focusing on two metrics, which in this interesting moment, turnover and engagement are kind of in a weird spot as lots of organizations are trying to be smaller and aren't quite as concerned with retaining staff. So those metrics become a lot less powerful in convincing leaders to do things. And then the other piece that really popped was about 84% of the respondents said they had some sort of challenge with their people analytics. mostly around data quality, leadership buy-in, or just not having the analytic tools or expertise to do the things they knew they needed to do. So often these kinds of questions are one-offs, and if you don't have the talent on staff or outsourceable ready, the opportunity to put the information in front of them passes you by.
See, I'm listening to that, and like the thing that gets me is we sometimes assume that something we're excited about, someone else is gonna be excited about. The story I told, like that was a great example of that, where you find something like this is it, and you can see it in the movies, right? Where someone's like, I've got the piece of information, I'm gonna run and I'm gonna save the day. And for them, if it doesn't touch on the thing that's right there, they're focusing on, as you're saying, Ken, if it doesn't touch the thing that they care about, then who cares? Why should I even, pay this any attention at all? Our brains are wired to focus on what matters, right? Not just for survival, but for our ongoing priorities. And if it's not a priority for them, it's not going to register on their radar at all. So we found some similar things. We just did this big study looking at over 1,000 organizations, what their employee experience, how they're measuring different things, their focus on culture from an HR perspective, their focus on a culture of being data driven from an HR perspective. And the things that stood out to me were things like, we think we're way better at telling stories about the data than we actually are. We find that when teams are not good at telling stories with data and really framing that up and connecting it to things that their leaders care about, then we just end up falling back on, you said sort of a couple metrics, Ken. Like one big metric for us we found was just turnover. We just try to use that. I'm from the southeastern US, so we call it a whooping stick, right? We use it like a whooping stick to get their attention, to try to wake them up. And if they may not care about that to the degree that we think that they do. So we've got to craft these things, connect them in with a story, really lean forward and look for things they care about, and try to put that effort in before the problem comes. I think, Ken, you sort of touched on that a minute ago, and that really stands out to me. That proactive piece matters so much. If we're waiting till the moment that they ask for it, it may be too late already.
I think one other thing we should acknowledge is that a lot of data that we want and need, we don't have access to. It could exist. We don't necessarily get to it easily. So for example, turnover is one stat that HR has pretty much good access to, likely because they're processing the departures and they're processing the new hires. So that's something that they can just pull. On the other hand, being able to connect that to financial data, to be able to say, like, how much is our cost of turnover, becomes a lot harder because you don't necessarily have easy access to the financial information. You might have to go to the sales team and say, could you please show me this thing that's not structured in a way that you really want to work with in that way. And so I also want to acknowledge that, like, it's not just that HR is not necessarily trying or thinking about these things, but often there's a lot of politics that they have to manage in order to get to that kind of information.
Yeah, I'm hearing all these things, and like the storytelling is a huge part of when I hear you, Ben, talk about the storytelling aspect of it. I think I'm sitting here with Ben and Ken, and y'all speak a different love language. I love all the things about data. As a former entrepreneur, and I guess former still entrepreneur in myself, I love data. I love what it can say. I love to speak about it. But y'all bring a different type of language, right? Your love language about the research, diving into the back end process of understanding what you're trying to measure, right? It looks different. And so when I hear storytelling, and I'm thinking, I know y'all two very well over the last month of us bonding together and talking about this research, it sounds different to me. And it reminds me of something that I had to learn as a leader of 18 retail stores, Ken, is that what's simple to me may not be simple to others, right? And so when we talk about storytelling, Ken and Ben, how I explain it to a frontline employee, like this is how we measure things, looks different than how I'll explain it to a CFO, right? There's a different measurement. He's looking at different, KPIs. He's looking at different outcomes that he's desiring. Talk a little bit, Ben, because you mentioned it, about the importance of storytelling, because you got to speak the language of people. And I think that's where the ball is dropped, is that how you speak to me may be different than how you speak to somebody in the HR team, and how HR may be able to decipher what you're saying to them to be able to communicate it to the leaders and the managers that needs it the most, right? To be able to influence that. Can you talk a little bit about that gap? Because I think it's communication, storytelling that is a gap as well.
So I feel like I have a story for everything, but I'll tell you, I screwed this up the first time I had to tell a story that would get buy-in. When I was working as an HR leader for a company. We're trying to advocate for our very first piece of HR software. I was getting off of Excel finally. We're going to have something that really worked. And the way I pitched it to our leadership, please don't laugh at me, but I pitched it to them as this would make my job easier. Okay. And now they didn't laugh at me, but they probably should have, because they were like, no. And I kind of moved on and had a little bit of, frustration. And then I realized I was frustrated myself because I'd not told a story that was compelling to them. If I had instead said, listen, these people are working billable hours, and every half hour they spend on this cost us as a company X. And right now it's looking like they're spending, this much time doing that. So it's costing us this many tens of thousands of dollars to do this process. If we used a piece of technology, it would have to cost this much to even, overcome that. And it's a fraction of it. So there's a real story there that connects to what they care about. They're thinking about direct revenue. They're thinking about those sorts of things. The CFO, as you said, George, like that's what they eat, breathe, sleep. And so if I had to approach it that way, it would have been a very different outcome, I believe. But I approached it the wrong way. It was hard to, come back from that one. When it comes to telling the story, we have to make it matter in a way, translate it in a way that matters to them. So one of the things that I did years ago, the Association for Training and Development, we had put together a piece around reskilling. And one of the things I put in there, I was very adamant this goes in there, because like, we're not talking to CFOs. We're not talking. I'm like, yeah, but your HR people, your talent people are going to be talking to them at some point. They got to get investment in this. And so in there, we put this table that said, hey, listen, HR cares about this. Translation, finance cares about that. Here's how you talk about reskilling in a way that matters to them. For your managers, maybe it's team stability. For your C-suite, maybe it's competitiveness in the industry. But you've got to talk about it in a way that they are like, hold on, wait, what did you say? Like, I want you to say that again, and I'm going to write it down this time because that was really good. But if you just show up talking about it, bless us, right? We use HR speak, right? Showing up, talking in HR speak, then we're not going to get the support that we need, the buy-in, and it may not land the way we hope that it would. Like we have this picture, Ken, in our head of what's going to be the response. And when you get something else, you're like, what did I do wrong? And usually it comes to that story that we tell or don't tell in the right way.
I really think about it as how do they live what it is that I'm asking them to change? So for example, I was talking to one CFO and he was like, oh yeah, okay, you're saving me all this time. Where does it go? I was like, what? It's like, okay, all these employees are now saving an hour a week. Do they just have an extra hour, or is that hour more productivity? Is this a well-being advantage? Like, what is it that's going to happen as a result of this hour saved? And being able to articulate that back and be like, okay, for your HR team, that's more certifications they can earn. That's time to invest on conflict management, which is the top two things that HR people in one of our other studies said they would invest their time in if they got an hour back each week. And so being able to articulate that, like, all those fights that are wasting your time of back and forth and people can't figure it out, you know what? We'd be better able at solving those things to get you back your time. That makes it something much more real for them, both from a financial perspective and a practical lived perspective. And that story might change a bit. So if you're talking to the C-suite people, it's going to be a lot of numbers. It's a lot of like, where does my money come from? As you go down, it's going to be, hello, manager. Do you want to have some of your sanity back? This is what's going to happen if you do these things. And that story is meaningful to them as opposed to just being important to you.
Yeah, I got the Jerry Maguire "Show Me the Money" in my head when you were saying that, Ken. It was great.
Yeah.
So we have the gaps. We understand where we're falling short in some of these areas through some of the research that we have. Talked about some of those struggles as well. What's the critical foundation, Ken, for data-driven culture? We talk about how this drives things, and culture is kind of this thing. Not a lot of people think about data-driven culture. We think about culture, talking about engagement, employees, but can you speak on this and what it means and what's critical foundation for it as well?
So this really reminds me of a story. I was sitting with a colleague who works at a big company, and we both went to grad school together, and I was like, oh my God, you're so lucky to work there. They talk about data all the time. They must be this data-driven culture that, it's so easy to drive things through. And she looked at me and was like, oh, Ken, sweet, sweet child. The reality is when I tell them what they want to hear, they don't want any data. When I tell them things they don't want to hear, then I need piles and piles and piles of data. And so the key thing that really just exploded to me was like, we need to be able to get people to recognize that the truth isn't always what they like, and that what is being said by the data is what we change to. And that doesn't mean you were wrong, or foolish, or in any way incorrect and should be ashamed of that. But like, the data says this is the way the world works. Let's move with that. And if the data changes, we'll change again. But that gives a centralized, objective truth that people can say, okay, I understand why change came or why it didn't. And I think that allows your data to really help you be successful, as opposed to just using it as a club to shut down an argument you don't like.
Ben, I see you thinking over there.
I know. Every time Ken speaks, I'm trying to make some mental notes because I don't have time to make real notes. Like I'm getting good ideas for every time Ken shares something. So I'm going to say the big thing for me, the foundation for a data-driven culture here is having a hungry HR leader who wants to use this stuff to drive change. If you are one of those leaders who's content to just sort of react and respond or use your gut or whatever else, I've been there, I've done that. And I've also taken the other approach and I've seen better outcomes there. So it's not just us preaching and telling you to do this thing that we've never done. Ken lives and breathes by data. He's talked about these different studies that he's using to inform strategy and to help HR leaders like you. I did the same thing. So I've seen the value of it. It's not just us telling you to do it, but it's something we do ourselves. And so it's having that champion, the person that says, we have to have this in order to succeed. The other thing I think is really interesting is when we look in the data, one of the things that we find is that we forced HR leaders like all of you to respond to a question that said, are you data-driven or more people-oriented? Which one of those two are you? Which one of those things matter the most? And we gave them a third option, which was the cheater answer, which is both matter. And what we found is that if someone said that they are purely data-driven, which sounds like a good thing to be today, right, in this conversation, they didn't have some of the positive outcomes we would have looked for or hoped for. When people were just people-focused, same thing. They missed some of those positive outcomes that we would look for in a company that's successful. But when they said, listen, we're using the data to serve the people. We're not just using it in place of them. We're using this to know what they need from us. We're using this to know how to adjust our benefits, how to make sure that we're hearing the challenges they're having with leadership or with our culture. We're using it to pay attention to the training they need to develop the skills so they can serve our customers and deliver services and build products and do the things they need to work as an employee here. That's what we found in the research is it's not just enough to be one or the other. And there was a time in my career where I was like, I really love people. That's why I'm doing HR. That's what really drew me into this. And I still, to this day, enjoy seeing that change in the team around me. When something positive happens, I get that same joy that I did as an HR leader. But it's not enough to just have that piece because you can never serve them well enough, deeply enough, to the extent you need to or could, if you don't have the if back it up. And if you're just seeing people as numbers, just dollars and cents, that's all that ever matters. They have a job over there in accounting for you. Probably you can go and take that. Like it's okay. But you have to balance the people side with the data side if you're going to really be effective there. And that's what I would encourage we're talking about the foundations for that culture. That leader has to have both of those things. I think that's what I'm going to come back around to as my key takeaway there.
I would add one other thing that Ben really made me think about, which is the importance of context. So I was walking through some data with some leaders at an organization. They were in a tumultuous moment and their engagement scores were horrible, like really bad. And they were just like, is this bad? We're going through all these things. Is this actually good considering we're in transformation and in a struggling industry? And they were just going back and forth, trying to find some way to say, you know what, we think we're better than the average. And I had to stop them and be like, I'm gonna sort of break this illusion that you're spinning up for yourselves. Your headquarters employees are vastly less happy than your employees in the warehouse. I have never seen that in my career. They could be equal, but like never are the people closest to power more unhappy than the people furthest from it. And they stopped and went, you're right. Okay, what do we need to do? And like the ability to sort of take the numbers and give them emotion at the same time as like ranking and give context suddenly shocked them out of like, how do I spin this to how do I respond to this? And that was like a really big shift for them.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that, resistance? Because I think a lot of people that find that data and research and driving this culture is a positive thing. Maybe some of them struggle with how to communicate, and the usage, but sometimes I just feel like I'm hitting a brick wall, right? You're trying, and there's this resistance to this data-driven decision making, like being driven by the business. Can you talk a little bit about how to, like, I want some takeaways that our HR pros and those who are watching, some things that they can really strategically use to be able to implement, maybe communicate. Who do you start with? Maybe is there somebody that maybe on the team that could buy in, so you can go with two more people than yourself, Ken?
So one time I was working with somebody who put together all the data, and the boss just kept saying, I don't care if this is going to make me 200% ROI, I'm not doing it. And the person was like, I don't understand. Like, I've presented this perfect picture. And he was like, what is the numbers that I need to present to get this leader to believe it? And I was like, there are no numbers, because you already presented those numbers and they're saying no. So you need to talk to the people that chat with that leader and understand how they feel about the issue in question. In this case, it was about having a more flexible workplace. And it's like, why don't they like this? What does it say to them? What does it mean to them as a human being? Then you can align your data to speaking to those issues. And they may not tell you themselves, but their colleagues will tell you. And then if those colleagues believe in it, then you can get them to amplify your story. I think one of the things that we need to really think about is, as HR people, we have the power to align the forces of this person's friends and these colleagues, and we see that pattern of human interaction. Use it. Like, get allies who can tell you that leader, like, you know what, like, you get to make the choice, but I think you're really making a mistake. And when you hear it from all your colleagues, from the other people you respect, from sometimes the CFO is like, you know what, they convinced me with the numbers, I don't know why you're fighting on this, is gonna allow you to at least get the stage you need to have that conversation.
We're typing in the chats. I'm going to give a book recommendation there. Like you said that, Ken, it made me think about Robert Cialdini's book, Influence. And he talks about all these different ways that we can get someone to buy into something, or to react in a way that we want them to. You can never use the power for evil. Okay. I share that, knowing you can only use this power for good and to help people, but use this to sort of engineer a response that you're looking for. And it comes down to using social proof, part of what you're talking about, Ken, right? Using that connection, using this innate desire we have to be consistent with decisions. So you start with small questions, get them saying yes, and you start building to that bigger one where they want to say yes again, because they want to be inconsistent, right? Hey, you care about your people? Yes, absolutely. You really want what's best for the people on your team? Yes, I want them to succeed. Okay. Well, this is one of the things that's going to take to be able to lead to that. You want that for them, right? They want to say yes. Like, you've got to lead them down that path and get them doing that. The other thing is, let's say that you have a leader like George. Okay, I work with George on a daily basis. He said love earlier, and that's not common in an HR webinar. His language is not data. If I showed up with him and gave him a bunch of stuff, that 200%, he may have done the thing and shut down, like the boss you were talking about, Ken. But if I said, listen, this is going to lead to the people around you being more fulfilled at work, they're going to be more satisfied. They are going to be telling their friends about how great this place is to work. We've been having those recruiting challenges, trying to find someone for your team. They'll tell everybody they know if we start doing things like this, right? You have to know that leader and their way of interacting, and you can use the data, or you can use some of the more social pieces like that to try to influence them in the right way. That's the other thing I would add to that, because every one of us is a little different in the way that you show up. That bring me the ROI study, by the way. I want to see that number. That's going to make my heart sing with joy. And I'm like, let's put the money investment there. But it's different for all of us.
I Another like just very concrete tip is just asking them a question, what would need to be true in order for you to get on board with this? Because what that does is it flips their brain from looking for holes to start looking for solutions. And so suddenly they're telling you, if you can get me this data, I will believe that this is valuable. They might reveal that non-numeric issue that they have that you can then get a colleague to help with, or you can be like, great, let me show you that that assumption you have that people who work flexibly don't produce actually isn't true, because now I can design something that addresses that question.
Wow. So I'm over here thinking, I wish I had both of y'all on my team in some of my stressful moments, right? Y'all are very, very convincing, but I sit here and I'm trying to put myself in the role on the other side of this table, and I'm thinking, what really matters? What really matters, and beyond what, right? It kind of reminds me of going back, what is simple to me, maybe not simple to others. Why does it matter? When I hear you say what you just said, Ken, I hear, how do I get George not only just bought in, but how do I get George engaged into these metrics, into this story, into this data-driven thought process and culture? Ben, what really matters? And then Ken, I want to know why, right? Ben, what really matters? Is it engagement metrics? Is this, we think about engagement scores. What really matters, Ben? And then Ken, you tell me why.
So one thing we found in the data, I want to come back to the engagement thing really quickly. One thing we found in the data are that teams that are very reactive. Someone shows up at your office, says, hey, I need this report, this stat, this presentation, whatever the data point is, and we just respond, but then we stop. That's all we do is just react. Like, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end is proactive. We hear that conversation where those leaders are talking, like, wait a minute, I actually have data that would give them insight on how to solve that. And you show up and you proactively look for ways to plug in and add value. The reactive companies are more likely to use engagement, satisfaction, turnover. Those are the top 3 metrics they use. There's nothing inherently bad about those, but they're sort of softer metrics, the satisfaction, the engagement piece especially. The other side of that, those leaders who are at those companies where they're more proactive, they're leaning in, they're looking for ways to add value, they're looking for how they can be more effective. They look at turnover, yes. They also look at performance and productivity metrics. How do we see who's doing a great job at our company so we can make sure we keep them? And they also look at things like training and development ROI. How do we know if the dollars we're putting into developing our people and building those skills are actually paying off? So they're looking at different sets of metrics. So coming back to the question you asked, George, you said, is engagement the right one? If you walked into your leader's office right now and you said, hey, our engagement score went up 10%, would they respond? Would they react? I know my boss would have been like, oh, thanks, and got right back to work. When I reported to the CEO, he cared about our people. That was a really important thing. That's why they founded the company. They'd worked for a small company with a great culture, cared for the people, got acquired by a large organization that was all process, all red tape, and the people were secondary to the business. And they said, no, that's why he started the business in the first place. So he cared about people, but I had to couch that in a way that mattered to him, whether it was tying back to, hey, listen, engagement's up. We're actually seeing higher profitability on these 3 programs because of that. Or we're seeing this other outcome that is exciting to you. We're actually going to be able to hit that number we were looking for from a retention perspective for the year because people are more satisfied. They're more likely to stick around. I needed to turn that into something that he cared about. But engagement by itself in a vacuum may or may not have actually resonated with him. So there's my first thoughts, Ian.
I think what Ben is sort of driving at is, what is the question you're actually trying to answer? And so we're coming off of about a decade or so of organizations being really focused on growing their talent. So we'll take tech as a primary example. Tech has been a space where you are a very talent-driven business for a long time. And by talent-driven, I mean the quality of your employees determines the quality of your profits, as opposed to something that's more capital-driven, like real estate. Like, your money comes from the places, not from the people. And so when you have that sort of situation for a long time, people just sort of fall into engagement is important because if the people are what matter, we can't lose them. We can't pay this price of turnover. It slows down the business. It stops the projects. There's lots of ways in which you can articulate how engagement makes you money and a lack of it loses you money. As you move into a world where people are now having a conversation of like, does AI replace half those employees? I'm not so concerned about engagement. How my employees feel is not that big a deal because now there's a glut in the market of people who can do the things that I need them to do. So if you have a boss who's really focused on supply and demand economics and is really comfortable with, I supply as much emotional concern as there is demand in the market, then engagement's not going to win you a lot of kudos or influence. You're going to have to go to a different space or get specific and say, fine, engagement across the board doesn't matter, but this department is made of employees that are extremely difficult to replace, and that is still a talent-driven function in our business, and they hate it here. So would you like to resolve that problem so you don't suddenly miss all your deadlines, or leave it be? And that sort of like straightforward, you're in charge, boss, but you have a trade-off to make, and I have made it very clear what that is a very influential way of having that conversation, because they don't feel like they have to do what you tell them, but the world is the world. And so that's much more useful than just saying employees are unhappy. Well, why do I care?
Mm. So as we connecting, I like to do the, connecting the dots. I'm like, all right, we started with engagement metrics. How do we then move it to like the business impact, performance, retention, and we talk about revenue, because I think we got some stories. Maybe I like story time, but there's lessons from high performing teams and that balance of employee satisfaction, engagement. Does it always equal success? Does it always equal a thriving data-driven business, right? The number one rule that I was taught getting into business was the number one rule was to stay in business, right? It was not, employee satisfaction or engagement. Because after the number one rule, if you don't do rule number one, if you don't stay in business, no other rule really matters, right? And so how do you then align those metrics together to be able to tell that story? Because there's some pushback, and there will always be pushback as a leader, where you have the mindset, Ben. I think this is something you said earlier on in our conversations behind the scenes was, when a leader has that pushback where they care about X, why should they care about HR data, and that thought process? Can you talk a little bit about connecting these dots, engagement, business performance, retention, revenue, and the pushback that can come with, the X that really matters to some?
I'm thinking about when we used to do an annual spring engagement survey of our people, and there were managers in our business that thought it was a big waste of time. If they need something, they'll tell me, right? And then there were other leaders that said, we live and breathe by the things we get from this. This helps us influence our strategy for the coming year. And so it really came down to the unique questions. But the thing that I've been really challenging leaders on this year is to go a layer deeper. Right? Don't just know what your metrics are there for engagement. Maybe you go a layer deeper and say, hey, listen, something's going on. The example Ken gave, like the corporate versus the warehouse staff. What if we found out? What if you found out tomorrow that the women in your organization have engagement scores like half as high as men? What would you do about that? How would you respond? Would you raise the flag to your leadership and say, something's wrong here? I don't know what it is, but we've got to find this immediately because we can't stand to lose all this great talent. Right? That's the difference for me than just saying, hey, our engagement score up, down, like this little number we're charting over time. That may not matter to anybody. If you go a layer deeper than that and start seeing what's happening with your people, something's going on because our sales team is like off the charts. Going back to that example I gave earlier on the turnover, I found of that 55% a year turnover, one of our departments had 80%. I don't know how they kept the lights on. Honestly, that's ridiculous. One of the other departments had 10%. And it had the toughest clients to work with. So we had people that were doing direct care for the developmentally disabled and the mentally ill. Really hard work, 24 hours, 7 days a week operation. And their pay was not great. You may get a little bit of a bump in pay, but it was, if you had some certifications, but it was not great pay. And so I went to this leader to figure out what was going on there. I was hoping to gather something I could take back to our other leaders in the business and say, go do these things. And it wasn't a data point. We're here telling all this data. Some data we get is qualitative. It's not just quantitative. And I watched this leader sit down and it's like, hey, Ken, it's your first day here. I'm so glad you're here with us. And when I met you, I knew you were something special. And I know you're going to do great things here. I cannot wait to see you succeed. If you need anything, my door's open, but I'm open. Whatever you need from me, I'm here to make you successful. And he's talking to this young lady who's especially this job. And she is looking at him like just floored because probably no one's ever talked to her like that in her entire life, especially when it comes to work. Not when you're making, as the low end of the salary range like they were. It's like, hey, get to work. You were 10 minutes late. That's the only thing they say to you. And so you see things like that start to stand out and help me understand what it takes to be great. And again, that's a qualitative data point that I was then able to start trying to copy and paste to our other leaders to say, listen, I know this is not easy, but you've got to care, because that's the difference. That's the biggest difference I can see in this when I start looking at what's happening over here is he cares, and the people can feel it, they can see it, and I can see it in the numbers, the actual outcomes. It leads to that outcome. So, oh goodness, I'm getting all fired up. I love that gentleman's name is Antoine. I've told his story thousands of times in the last 15, 20 years since I met him originally, because it made such an impact on me. And it's a reminder that we have leaders like that in our businesses, and it's our job to elevate their stories, to celebrate those stories so other managers know what good looks like. Whether it's quantitative or it's qualitative, either one will get the job done sometimes.
I think one of the things that people make a big mistake with data is they go into it as a metric. It is a number I need to either hit or report, and that's it. Really what it is an explanation of what is happening and an ability to know if that story you heard is happening everywhere, or if it really is this one-off thing that you should just handle and like forget about. And so I think a lot of times organizations put that score up on the board. Have we hit it? Have we not hit it? They don't do what Ben is saying and say, what is the theory of change here? If I play with the way I talk to people or the way I do the walk around the halls, does that make a difference? A lot of times there's just communication issues. So I was working with a hospital to sort of echo what you were talking about, Ben. And what sort of popped from all their data was that people were saying, I just want the boss to walk through and see what we deal with, because the abstract numbers don't reflect people dying in front of me, or like the kinds of crises and comfort and emotional labor that I'm doing is not reflected in your numbers. And I need to know that you know that. And every time you ask me for more and I don't believe that you know that, I resent you. And so one of our big pieces of feedback was you need to go and just send someone. It doesn't have to be you. If you're not the person who can feel what you need to feel, send someone else to be on the floor and be like, I have the CEO's ear. I can tell them what is happening. And like, let them know that you understand both pieces of it. And I think that was a action change that they could make. I think one of the questions that I was also in like the Q&A that I think is really important is this question of like, how do I change behavior when there's like a very strong sense of who we are and how we should be? You know, that leader is very to the facts. How do I like deal with the numbers? And so like there's a blog on my LinkedIn that ticks off some really great insights from the Noble Collective that talk about what people lose when you change. And when you start looking at it through, are they afraid of losing a story of competence? Are they afraid of having all their past successes disappear in the change? And one of the, I think there were about 7 or 8 things on the list. When you go and talk to them through that lens, you begin to say, you know what? You did all this work in the past in order to achieve this great outcome. Now I am going to help drive that outcome further with XYZ, but it stands on your shoulders. And so you stitch the data that you're presenting to their past success, and that can help you make the transition from the way we've always done it to the way we're going to do it. But you never want to indict the past. Like, you always wanted to be talking about how we move forward into the future.
Yes, honor.
Yeah.
I am paying honor to what you did to get us here. acknowledging that we're going to need something else, additional, extra, whatever, a different direction, whatever else to get us there. But I think that's a great way to put that, Ken. Excellent, excellent.
Awesome. So I just want to kind of throw back. We talked a little bit about where HR is falling short with the research and data. We talked a little bit about how it's been more than just numbers, right? We're wanting to create and build this data-driven culture, and then talked about a little bit about what really matters and how to buy and get that buy-in, that influence of leadership. I want to chat just real quickly because we got a lot more to cover. I want to get as much as possible into this. But what are some of the common pitfalls and how to fix those? And meaning, what are the biggest mistakes, pitfalls when it comes to this, roadblocks that HR faces when it comes to leveraging some of this analytics and doing it effectively, but also efficiently, right? That's a key word. Like, I want to be effective, but I also want to be efficient with the time. Can you share a little bit about that, Ben?
Sure, I'll start us off, and I know Ken's got some good inputs here on this as well.
Yeah.
So the biggest pitfalls are, for what I've seen, I've already sort of called some of them out. We don't tell good stories. Ken, I may steal one of yours, right? We don't actually know what question we're trying to answer. We don't know the outcome we're looking for. We're just like, I'm just gathering a metric. That's a big thing that put this topic on my heart, to be very transparent with all of you, is I kept seeing HR leaders like you being told, if you want to be good at this, just go gather these numbers, gather these metrics, track these things. And so many of leaders like you would come back to me and say, okay, I'm doing all this, but I don't feel any better. We're not getting any progress. What's happening? And you're told, just go back and collect more of them more frequently. You didn't collect this other one, so it's all null and void. And it really comes down to, do you have the attention and interest of your leadership? I've been saying for this for a while now, but your leadership will not be invested in what you're doing until they're interested in what you're doing. And the way you get them interested is with that story we sort of touched on earlier, the importance of really connecting to their key priorities, the things that keep them up at night. Here's you a takeaway. Okay, here's a key thing to go do. If you don't know the top 2 or 3 things that keep your leadership up at night, your CFO, your CEO, the people who are at the top of your organization, if you don't know the answer to that right now, or you're like, I think I know, but I'm not sure, go find that out before tomorrow. Go find the answer to that question, because that is going to help you see where this work you're doing over here starts to have parallels, and you can bring that together and help them solve the big problems they have. That's the first thing I would say on that one, is really knowing what matters to them, because we assume we do, we may not.
Ben, say that one more time for those people who may have missed it. They were trying to write it down. You said, you talked about the interested aspect. That was some good stuff. I wanted to like wave at you, like, man, that's good. Say that one more time for those who may have missed it in the back.
Leadership will not be invested until they are interested. So we've got to make sure we capture their attention with something that matters to them deeply. Then they're going to have that support there that we're looking for, because the data that we've collected tell us that you may have some tools, you may have some support, but when you have those 2 things together, you start to see this incredible chain of positive events that come out of that. All right, Ken, what you got for us?
So I would flag 3 things. One, you need to make sure that you have some kind of workflow that's passively collecting data. So when you're doing your onboarding, are you capturing the completion of it, not just as like an email that says they did it, and then you have to go back and find all those emails and consolidate them. It's a huge amount of time waste, and it doesn't actually work very well. People will then just say like, I'm not going to do this. So really making sure you have a way to capture data passively as you go along is really important. Also having a good data storage place that can get you the numbers you need easily. Because a lot of times you can do it, but it's an Excel sheet that's got to be pivot tabled and cross-referenced. I got to transform things, and time you spend actually stops you from doing the third thing that I want to mention, which really requires an opportunity to think, which is really having a theory of how things work. And so when you're saying engagement matters, being able to say why it matters really concretely often requires being able to find time to have conversations, being able to find time to actually stop and think about what happens in your organization, and like look at it in a creative way. I always think about a really interesting study comparing some big box stores and why engagement mattered for their employees, because it sounds like it's unskilled labor. Why does engagement matter? And the researcher took the time, really stepped back and thought about it, and they realized it was about whether or not stuff got on shelves quickly. The store that had more engaged employees kept their shelves stocked. The one where the employees felt exploited just were slower about it. And so customers complained, and they were like, the shelves are empty. I don't care. I'm now going to go to the other one down the street because what I want is there. And so when the researcher presented that to the leadership, they're like, we now know why engagement matters for our organization. And we're talking a lot about engagement, but it applies to any metric that you're studying or any process that you're managing. Being able to have good operational process around getting your data collected and understood gives you the time to actually think about what it's telling you, and then your story just sort of tells itself.
Awesome. Well, we're in this countdown of 9 minutes, so I'm gonna stop being selfish and asking my questions. I think we got a few questions in the chat, and we'll do some sprinkling, maybe do a rapid fire to cap this off. Is that okay with y'all?
Sounds good.
Good.
All right, so we have a question, and it's, can you suggest a source of org shape benchmarks as reference points in assessing a company's people metrics? So employees per manager, employees per director, senior directors, so on and so forth. And this person individually is based in San Francisco, but joining from New York City. So welcome. Thank you so much for that question.
So really, I'll get a quick answer on that one. I don't have a good source of data for org benchmarks in terms of reporting and everything else. One of the things I found is that there are lots of variables in that. And so every time we try to gather data on it, it gets kind of muddy. So to say, oh, listen, ideally you have exactly 4 people reporting up to a manager and 6 people reporting to a director, it's really hard to get that nuanced because every industry is a little bit different. One of my good friends, she's a VP of people for a tech company right now, but years ago when she was starting out, the company confounded me, okay? Like I'd heard this ratio of like 1 to 100 HR people. That was a very old metric. And they had 4 HR people and 80 employees because they were in this very highly competitive industry in the Boston area. They were in the tech scene. And so they needed all hands on deck to be able to compete there. So that threw out all the things I thought that I knew. And so that's the answer I'd give is I don't have a really good set of that. I would look at the data you have because you may find that, hey, as far as we see a span of control, when a manager has 8 direct reports, their turnover starts to tick up or their satisfaction ticks down. When they have 6 or fewer, it generally seems to be good. That's manager dependent in some ways, but you'll start to see that stuff if you look at your own data. Ken, anything to add on the metrics or sort of ratios, things like that?
I would double down on what you're saying, that dig deeper, because I think one of the problems with the way the question is phrased is it ends up being another metric. It's like the number is X and are we above it or are we below it? And that's what the leader's trying to trap you in. And so what you really want to do is dig deeper and say, okay, are we having a conversation about the value delivered by the money spent on this headcount? Show that to them. So is it like, oh, as Ben said, when we have teams of 10, turnover goes up, projects are later, quality is lower, errors go up. And when we have teams of 7, that's the moment where we see the big difference. I think the other thing you're going to want to look for is inflection points. So where the numbers really shift is where you're going to say, like, this is where the way we are operating, we get the best results. So let's expand that versus let's try and be like this other company, but they have a completely different operating system. And therefore, 100 people per HR person might make sense if all they do is benefits processing. But if they actually have to take questions and deal with conflicts and labor relations, it's a completely different equation.
All right, George, what else you got for us? You're on mute, my friend.
Real quick, rapid fire for you real quick. And just real simple answer, if you could. What's one metric the audience should use, consider using?
Who do you want to start?
One metric. Either or. You can start, Ben.
I'll say use turnover, but go one layer deeper. Know it turnover by manager.
I would say some form of productivity. And it's not necessarily straight up how many widgets you created, but anything that allows you to show that what you're doing helps people do their job better. And that is really going to carry you forward.
All right. And how do you show ROI on HR programs? Ken.
So I think you have to start with what is the ROI you want to have. So sometimes you're not going to be able to show the number. Like the finance may not track it. You may not have it. So you may want to just say learning programs. Do people actually know the information, and do their performance ratings go up? If they are in or out, control groups are really your key for return on investment conversations where you don't have a straight money line.
I'll add to that.
Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, sorry. Like really quick. The secret word, Ken, you talked about it sort of there, like touched on it, but pilot is your answer to a lot of things. Do a small group, test that out, and see if the outcomes are better or worse. Sometimes you'll find out they're not better. And it's good to know before you roll it out to everybody. Sometimes you'll find out that the numbers are incredible and you can't wait to start sharing with other managers. I've heard stories where HR tries a new program and other managers like knocking on the door, hey, when's our turn at that? And because it's going so well. So sometimes it goes really well and you get a chance to do that. Start with pilots.
Awesome. I know that we have one more poll, and we'll put this poll up. And as the poll pops up on your screen, again, we appreciate that. Give us an answer, give your answer. While they're doing the poll, gentlemen, one last question, and I'll let you be free reins. If there's one thing that you can give to the audience today as a takeaway to empower them, to inspire them on this topic, Ken, would you give us that one thing from yourself, please? And then Ben, follow up. One thing they can take away.
One thing they can take away. I think be curious. At the end of the day, if you're curious and interested to know what's happening, why it's happening, and how that affects the business, that is infectious. And as long as you are exploring, you're going to be able to see what data you need, where you want to go, and how you're going to connect that to what your leader wants.
Yeah, the thing I think I'll touch on is I love the curious piece there. That ties in with my go ask your questions. If you don't have the answers to those, go ask those questions to your leaders. I mentioned that earlier. No, you are the expert in your business. So great question a minute ago on what are these external metrics. There's nothing wrong with external benchmarks, but you need to look at your own data first, because you may find some things in there that you just don't know because you haven't really gone a layer deeper. I told about the amazing leader I found in our business that was doing things that bucked all of the trends and all the things we thought we would find. We looked in there because I went one layer deeper than just the overall turnover number, which anyone could cite. Walk into the hall, you could ask anyone at our corporate office, they could tell you, oh yeah, turnover is 55%. But when you ask them, what does that make up? You get a blank stare. And so we learned that we had onboarding issues. We had issues with realistic job previews. We were not telling them how hard the work would be. So a significant chunk of that turnover came in the first 2 weeks on the job. And we had other issues with other managers in the business, but I had to go a layer deeper to find that. So my encouragement to you is know your data, spend time with that, go a layer deeper. And as Ken said, absolutely be curious, ask questions of the data, but also the people around you, because you'll find ways to start marrying those up in helpful ways where you get to be the hero in the story. And that's what I want for all of you.
Awesome. Ken, my friend, thank you so much, Ben. This has been great for me. I love the different perspectives. And listen, if I can take away and walk away from this kind of conversation, talking about data-driven metrics and all that good stuff that we've been sharing, and I feel inspired, like I know something, I know that we kept it simple for others. So I appreciate you both. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, your wisdom, your data, your research. Make both of you smile there for your words for that. Before we wrap up, I want to thank all of you, the audience, for joining us today. And we hope you found this session very valuable. We hope that it's been something that you've been able to take away some actionable insights and ideas to be able to take back to your team, to your leadership. Also, if you have any further questions and you want to explore how HiBob and the team can support your organization's unique needs, listen, do not ever hesitate to reach out. HiBob is here for you. The team is here to help and support you, and we're excited to be able to do so. I want to encourage everybody, coming June 4th through the 6th, HR Summer School is going to be live and back in action, and we are so grateful for the sponsorship of HiBob and you'll be able to hear some more insights and greatness from the HiBob team at HR Summer School, June 4th through the 6th virtual. You can check out hrsummerschool.org for more information. As Ben said earlier, leaders will not be invested until they're interested. And I'll add to that. Sometimes as leaders, we have to inspect what we expect. If we want something great out of it, we got to look into it, dig deep, see what the data says, tell the story, and be able to communicate to all. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you again to the speakers. Thank you to HiBob, and thank you to the audience.